Growth for Integration was the title of the first forum of the heads of African investment promotion agencies, the IPAS's first Africa Forum held in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. This included representatives of 34 African countries. Since 2014, Egypt has been regaining its presence and momentum in the continent out of a belief that resources and potential are endless and should be harnessed to the benefit of the African people. Challenges are many, yet opportunities are limitless. Here, excuse me, we don't only talk about physical riches, but we also talk about human capacity, a continent blessed with its young constituents and with its natural beauty and blessings. The challenges are manageable in the presence of a political will to tackle them, and with this fact in full gear, one can only expect a bright future for the inhabitants of Africa, as well as great investment opportunities that present themselves for those seeking new possibilities. Good evening. You're watching The Business Insider. I'm Ayman Salah. We'll be back. Welcome back. Let's start with our first news item here, and it starts with a consortium of national banks is planning to launch a fund of funds with an initial asset under management of 1 billion Egyptian pounds. Those will be the assets under management. The three state-owned banks are working to finalize FRA, or Financial Regulatory Authority, approvals to launch the fund. Enterprise reported that the fund plans to invest in SMEs, in healthcare, education, fintech, agribusiness, renewables, fast-moving consumer goods, as well as information and communications technology. A fund of funds is one that chooses to invest in other funds, whether equity or debt, rather than individually vetting specific companies or debt issuances it may want to back. A new export support program got the green light from the cabinet on Wednesday and is due to come into effect by the new fiscal year. The program is like the one implemented for nearly a decade, which subsidizes exporters based on the volume of their sales. It also aims to boost domestic manufacturing, add value to local production, push for export growth from Upper Egypt, border regions, the Robeki Industrial Zone, Damietta Furniture City, and the Suez Canal Economic Zone, as well as drive sales to Africa and other target markets. This includes helping companies cover freight costs. The cabinet made this statement while the details are still to be revealed. The new program replaces the 6 billion Egyptian pound scheme that fell out of favor with exporters due to a lack of clarity in its executive regulations and for promises to reimburse exports via cash and non-cash incentives rather than just cash. We'll be back. Welcome back. You're watching The Business Insider. I'm Ayman Salah. Tonight I'm joined by His Excellency Dr. Mostafa Hadhoud. He is a petrochemicals and energy expert. He's a professor, a former politician, and a former governor. A pleasure to have you here on the show with us tonight. We're discussing the chemical and fertilizer industry and prospects of moving or cooperating further with African countries and means of deepening the trade and industrial ties between Egypt and its African neighbors. Let's watch this report and then start our discussion.
The world currently faces 4 challenges, at least according to Egypt's Prime Minister Mostafa Madbouli. One is COVID-19 and the shortage in vaccine supply, particularly to developing countries. The second is a limited supply because of the pandemic and decline in maritime shipping. Third is rising inflation rates globally coupled with increasing unemployment rates. And the fourth is trade conflicts creating a climate of uncertainty and jeopardizing the geopolitical order. These facts were stated during Madbouli's Under the Slogan Growth for Integration, where he said during the inauguration of the first IPA's Africa Forum of the heads of African investment promotion agencies in Sharm el-Sheikh, organized by the General Authority for Investment and Free Zones, and known as GAFI, that Africa's share in the world's GDP is just 2%, or around $2.6 trillion, and urged a manufacturing expansion of more value-added goods through a radical industrial transformation that changes the African economic structure. GAFI chief Mohammed Abdel Wahab pointed out that Africa's real GDP is projected to grow by 3.4% in 2021, noting that Africa should also prioritize enhancing infrastructure and bolstering public-private partnerships. He pointed out that the continent's exports of manufactured products do not exceed 20% of the world's total exports, indicating that the continent's reliance on primary commodities make it less resilient in the face of economic shocks and global price fluctuations. The chemical and fertilizer industry in Egypt were a good example of potential growth and cooperation for value-added goods production in the continent. Plans to move into the African market over the next 3 years, from 2021 to 2023, include tackling the most important obstacles and challenges.
Welcome back. You're watching the Business Insider. Tonight I'm joined by His Excellency Dr. Mostafa Hadhoud, Professor of Petrochemicals and Energy and former Governor. A pleasure to have you here with us on the show. Well, the chemical and fertilizer sector in Egypt is certainly expanding and it is boosting. When we look at the potential for growth within the country, within the competitive markets, if you will, you find that there is some great potential. Let's talk about this in this sector specifically. Where do you see that potential?
I think that Egyptian industry in the field of fertilizers and the chemicals is one of the most important sectors which can help Egypt to penetrate into African market. Why? You know that Africa now is the best place in all of the world to export items for it. Why? Because when we said about African continent, it is the only continent in the world which is the number of population will increase from 1.4 billion now, and 2050 will be 2.8 billion.
Double.
Double. This means double inhabitants, all continents in the world, constant or reduced. So all countries in the world, United States, Russia, European countries, India, China, are asking and searching for the African market. For that reason,
because
Egypt,
of the consumers are growing.
Growth and the rate of economy increase in Africa, so the requirements of people in Africa will increase too.
Right.
For that reason, Egypt stress on the point that they must penetrate into the African market and how to facilitate for the people to work with African countries. I see that the chemical sector and the fertilizer sector is the best sector which is well developed in our country. You know that fertilizers are divided into 3 or 4 types. The first type is nitrogenous fertilizer, which depend on nitrogen. The second is phosphate fertilizer, which contain phosphorus. The third is potassium fertilizer, which contain potassium element. And the fourth type is the mixed fertilizers. Fortunately, Egypt is one of the biggest producer, not only in Africa, in the world. We produce from nitrogenous fertilizer 23 million ton per year. Our requirements in our country is about 11 million. So there is a quantity which can be exported to other countries more than 12 million ton per year. Where the source of nitrogenous fertilizer is natural gas. For that reason, we have now natural gas, and we have sufficient natural gas. So for that reason, we have now in our country 8 companies producing nitrogenous fertilizers. So the African countries need urea and ammonium nitrate, which are nitrogenous fertilizers. The second sector of fertilizers is based on phosphorus. 3 or 4 years ago, there was a deficiency of phosphate fertilizer in our country. But really, President Sisi stress and produce fertilizer based on phosphorus. We erected a very big factory in Al Ain Al-Sukhna. This factory produces phosphoric acid, sulfuric acid, and all types of phosphate fertilizers. We have monoammonium phosphate, which is named MAP, diammonium phosphate, DAB, triammonium phosphate. This means that all types of phosphate fertilizers are now produced in our country, with quantities needed for local market and sufficient quantity to be exported to our other countries. For that reason, African countries now, since 2020, last year, started to take their requirements of fertilizers, nitrogenous and phosphate fertilizers from Egyptian market. Really, there is many countries which are competitive to our country. For example, Morocco is a good producer for phosphate fertilizer, Jordan, India. For that reason, the market inside African countries is not easy. There is more competitive. More countries are looking for African countries. For that reason, our companies do their best in how to penetrate into the African countries. The third type of fertilizer is potassium fertilizers, which is based on potassium. Now we have 6 factories producing potassium fertilizers. This is based on production of potassium chloride with phosphoric acid, produce potassium phosphate and potassium sulfate. But unfortunately, the raw material potassium chloride is imported from Jordan or from other countries. But really, phosphate fertilizer, the basic raw material is phosphate ore, which is present in Abu Tartur in New Valley, and in Sabawiya and Hamrawiyan in Red Sea, and this is local production. Nitrogenous fertilizers are totally local production from natural gas. Maybe potassium sulfate, they need the raw material coming from Jordan, because potassium chloride is present in Jordan with good quantity. There is the fourth type of fertilizer, is named mixed fertilizers, which is named NPK, nitrogenous, phosphorus, potassium. This means that we produce mixed fertilizers, so the farmer can use this fertilizer to increase the quantity of potassium and sodium and phosphorus and nitrogen in the land.
And this, you need the imported type to be included?
Only this potassium chloride. But we have 6 factories producing potassium sulfate in our country. Now, I see that if we shall make facilitation for our private companies, and we have 2 types of companies in our country, private companies and some companies belonging to government. But really, all these companies sharing in exporting fertilizers to African countries, and not only African countries, European countries, and Asian countries, because we have now sufficient quantity of fertilizers, and we have good experience in production of fertilizer, and all requirements of local production is coming from our local production. For example, all the new agricultural land, which will be in El Moghra and in the new Delta and Mania and Sinai, their requirements for fertilizer were coming from local production. So I see that fertilizers, maybe it is the only products which depend mainly 99% from local production, and the small quantity are coming from outside as import materials. For that reason, the second sector, we can say chemical products. The chemical products are the very important sector also, how to help Egypt to increase the export to African countries. You know that chemical products can be also divided into many items. Chemical products based on materials coming from sea and from lakes. We have sodium chloride. This is a basic material. So now we have 4 factories producing sodium chloride coming.
That's what you put in batteries, right?
Yes.
Sodium chloride.
Sodium chloride. From this sodium chloride, we can use sodium chloride for food industry. We can use sodium chloride for industry, not only as industrial sodium chloride and the food sodium chloride. From this sodium chloride, we can produce other materials, sodium sulfate, potassium sulfate, magnesium sulfate. So all these materials are coming from the Mediterranean Sea and coming from the lakes water, especially you know that Mariut Lake, Manzala Lake, Bardawil Lake, Karun Lake in Fayoum. All this water, we can take from it sodium chloride, sodium sulfate, and magnesium sulfate. And all these materials are used for food industry, for agriculture, because magnesium sulfate is used as fertilizer. For that reason, now we have about 6 factories producing all these chemicals based on sodium chloride. We have sufficient quantity in our country. We can export to African countries, and we can export to Arab countries, and we can export also to Asian countries. But really, some of these materials are coming from China and coming from, for example, Turkey. For that reason, these countries export these materials with very low price. And this is very bad competitive to our products. For that reason...
So how does Egypt handle the African market when it comes to the competition?
Now, how to facilitation for this materials to come to African countries, you must decrease the price in order to be competitive with Chinese products and with Indian products, especially for these materials. The second sector of chemical material, which is based on natural gas. You know that natural gas, now we have good quantity produced locally. We produce every day 7.6 billion cubic feet. Our requirement is about 6. So we have sufficient quantity, 1.6 or 1.4 billion cubic feet per day. For now. This quantity, I see that must be directed to produce chemicals and the petrochemicals instead to export this material to outside.
Do you mean add value?
Added value. For that reason, you know that now we have a good plan in petrochemical production. You know that natural gas contain ethane, methane, and propane. So our first production to make separation of methane, ethane, and propane as pure material, we have. The second step to change ethane to ethylene and propane to propylene, we have. The third step, production of ethylene to polyethylene and propylene to polypropylene. We have now 4 factories producing this material. And the changing of ethylene to vinyl chloride, we have. And the vinyl chloride to PVC, we have. This means that during the last 20 years, we erect about 6 big factories producing ethane, ethylene, and propane and propylene, methane, methanol, and Dumyat, and changing these materials to polyethylene, polypropylene, and PVC. These materials are locally production and local use, but we can export this material to African countries.
We talked about the petrochemicals sector, if you recall, in our previous show together in May. If we concentrate on the fertilizer and chemical industry and Africa specifically, you said one of the most important items in order to compete in Africa is to decrease the price.
Yes.
But there are other factors when it comes to penetrating the African market.
The other factors, now for example, the shipping of these materials to African countries. You know that the cost of shipment from China or from United States is a huge number. So for this reason, we are near to African market. So now Egypt, the first time 6 months ago, we make naval shipment line from Ain Sokhna to Mombasa in Kenya. The first one.
And there is a logistical center, an Egyptian logistical center in Kenya,
In
Mombasa.
Kenya, Mombasa. Why? Because African companies need materials to be exist in their countries.
Right.
So there must be logistic area and logistic stores in which we can store our products, which we need to penetrate into African market directly in these countries.
Especially the African landlocked countries, those that don't have access to the sea.
Yes. Now, for example, Kenya is surrounded by 7 countries, which is landlocked. For example, Tanzania, south of Sudan.
Tanzania, you have Dar es Salaam.
Yes, but Zimbabwe,
Right.
Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, south of Sudan, Ethiopia, all these countries are looking to Kenya. For that reason, we must have logistic area inside Mombasa for the benefit of the Kenya and the other countries surrounding Kenya. And this is the first stage of our country. Now, when we are looking for the Eastern company, for example, Ghana and Nigeria and Niger, how to work with these countries? We must have a direct shipping line from Alexandria to these countries. This is very bad challenge and obstacles against our export products to these countries. But till now, when we export our products to these countries, we must make reshipment and other European ports, and then coming from this European port again to these countries. For example, Morocco, they have direct shipping lines from Morocco to these countries. For that reason, the market for their products is much better than Egypt. So now we must study the situation of all producers in Africa. We must study the production capability of Morocco, of Tunisia, of Algeria, of Egypt, of South Africa. So for that reason, when we study the situation of these countries, we can succeed to penetrate into this market. The second challenge, which against our export to African countries, there is a risk in the financial dealing between our companies.
The commercial and non-commercial risks.
This is a big risk for our companies. For that reason, we must choose the correct companies in these countries which can cooperate with Egyptian companies to export our product to them.
Or have an insurance guarantee, for example, export insurance guarantee.
But also very big problems and very high cost for this insurance. For example, credit for the guarantees need, for example, to ask for the companies, they need about 3 to 4 months to finish this. For that reason, the penetration into Africa is not easy. But if you study the situation in every country, you will succeed to penetrate how to penetrate into this country. But fortunately, I visit Kenya. For example, about 12 Egyptian companies, they have good deal in Kenya.
Right.
Really. They have store in the Mombasa area. They have their materials. They erect factories and they erect companies inside Kenya for the Egyptian products. For example, without mentioning name of companies, for example, the big company in our country producing electric cables, they have factory in Kenya, they have factory in Tanzania for our products. So for that reason, the second solution to penetrate the African market, they must make share between Egyptian market and other Egyptian companies and other companies inside, for example, Kenya or South Tanzania for production of our products. This will help.
Joint ventures.
Joint venture.
To create.
So for that reason, we must search about African companies in these African countries, how to share with our companies. The second, I need that a group of experts from Egyptian market, for example, including technical people, financing people, marketing people, to go and visit these countries. We must.
From what I understood, preparing and reading about this, the head of the Egyptian, the chemicals and fertilizer sector in the Egyptian Federation of Industries pinpointed that there will be a delegation of Egyptians that will go, and they have divided from here, from 2021 to 2023,
3 years,
into 3 stages.
They will start at first with two countries, which is very important to us. For example, Uganda and Tanzania, Kenya, Ghana, some of the eastern countries, and some of West countries, and South Africa. So when we shall succeed to penetrate in these countries, we shall succeed to support our products. But must be delegations, not only delegation for 2-3 days. No, we must have good delegations. They can stay in, for example, in one country 2 weeks, 3 weeks, in order to make many appointments and many discussions with the user, with the producer, with the final user in their country, with the high authority in this country, in order to, because China is working very well, India, because India is very near to eastern countries. Many Indian people are living in Kenya, in Tanzania, and Zimbabwe, living and inhabitants. For that reason, they have good relation between the companies in Kenya with the original company in India.
Right.
So we must say that the market in Africa is very difficult, and our country must make good work in order to penetrate in this market. For example, I was 10 days ago, I was in Belarus. Belarus are making very big forum how to make cooperation between African countries and Belarus. Belarus asking and searching for...
They're famous for agricultural machinery, right?
For tractors, equipment with tractors, loaders, all equipment for...
Which is an expanding and huge sector in Africa.
Yes. They make a conference and inviting African people. They came and I was sharing in this, and they said that Belarus need to penetrate into the African market. For that reason, this forum, which was 2 days ago in our country, is the same. We must continue.
Right. Your Excellency, a number of issues that you mentioned are not new.
No,
and we've been tackling and talking about them for over 20 years.
30 years.
Right. Such as the shipping lines, the logistical centers, the prices, the competition, and so on. What's different between now and then?
I think now there is a decision from President Sisi and all responsible men in our country that we must work with African countries. And there is stress on this point. And there is encourage for all Egyptian producers to search for the African market. But why? Without African market, our economy cannot be expanded. Why? Because now our share to our exporter to African countries, it is about 1.5% for all the importing items for African countries. Very low share. So for that reason, I see that in the future, these chemical materials, fertilizers, synthetic fibers, clothes.
Here you're talking petrochemicals.
Yes,
right.
Especially, for example, now we make improvement in our products in Mahalla and the Kafr Dawar for production of...
That's the textiles industry.
Textile. These textiles and fibers will be good chance to enter the African countries. Now our future to produce the electric car. This electric car will be used also in Africa. So we shall be only the first country in Africa producing and assembling electric cars. For that reason, we must search about electric car for local production and for local requirement and also for African countries. The only problem that we must fix groups of people in each sector. Group, for example, in petrochemicals must include experts, technological people, scientific people, marketing people, financing people. This group must be fixed, and this group will be responsible to penetrate into African countries and must be supported from our country and from our decision maker in our country. And these people, when will visit Kenya, they will have good experience how to deal with people in Kenya. When they shall move to Tanzania, they will have good experience from Kenyan people.
But you need in-house experts for every market.
For every sector and for every market. Must be, you know that China, to penetrate into Egyptian market, the people coming from China with bags to sell clothes in each country and each street.
And interestingly, they speak Arabic very well.
Very well. For that reason, please, this is the only problem which we must solve this problem by going every day and every day.
Would you say that the decision to start with the new export support program and to cancel the old export subsidy program, will this fall in line to promote the sector's exports to Africa?
Yes, yes, because once again, the market in Africa is looked by all countries in the world, because the rate of standard in European and Asian people now is to the high level. The requirements for people in Europe and Africa and Asia not the same like African countries. African people are looking to increase their level. All countries. For that reason, number of population...
They're seeking a higher standard of living.
Because they need to be like Asian. They need to be like European. So this is the first...
So it's an expanding market.
Yes. Second, the number of people will be doubled from 1.4 to 2.8. For that reason...
Consumers, double consumers.
Double consumer. Double consumer quantity and double rate of requirements. For that reason, if we lose the African market, we shall lose too much. For that reason, our task that during 2050 and before 2050, we must export to African countries by quantity not less than $100 million. $100 million.
Isn't that a modest figure in this day and age?
Sorry, $100 billion.
Billion?
Yes, sorry.
Right.
$100 billion.
Right.
Must be the quantity export to African countries to the year 2040, 2045.
And there is room.
This is the aim.
And there is room for a win-win between Egypt and all African countries, because you have know-how, you have capability, you have growing capacity.
We have
and
experience.
they have the demand, they have the growth, they have the need, and also they have the human resources and capacity.
But what must be, we must think for the African people and African countries, they have a lack of foreign currency. For that reason, China can offer for them some facilities.
Because it finances.
Financing. For that reason, Egypt must also work in the problem how to finance and how to help these African countries for financing. For that reason, the African market is not easy market. The problems of guarantee, the problem of securing our money when you can export this quantity for them. But I think that increasing the facility in our country, cooperation between Egypt and the well-developed countries in the world, for example, with China, with Belarus, with Russia and the European countries, to erect factories in our country for the products which are needed for African countries. For example, in the field of, as you said, agricultural equipment, in the field of petrochemicals, in the field of chemical materials, in the field of clothes, in the field of transportation means. If we shall succeed that to Egypt to be the gate of the European products and Russian products and American products for Egypt.
I always give two examples. One is the Egyptian cotton that used to be exported raw to Europe, manufactured,
and
tailored, and returned and sold at 10 times the price. And the other example is the cocoa that is sent to Europe to be refined and then resold in this continent or in the world at large 10 times the price.
Natural gas.
Natural gas.
We
is
export natural gas to European countries. They produce
Refined.
polymers, and they return it with 300 times price.
I think
300.
300 times the price, which is an example of what you can gain if
Added
you create
value.
value.
Added
If you
value,
create
yes.
value. But again, as you mentioned, Your Excellency, there is a key difference between the situation in the past and now. In the past, you knew what the challenges were. Now, you know what the challenges are,
but
you have the political will to tackle them.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yes.
Thank you very much for joining us on the show, Dr. Mostafa Hadhoud. Your Excellency, a pleasure having you, energy expert, professor of petrochemicals and energy, former governor. Thank you very much for joining us here on the show. Thank you for being with us. See you same time next week. I'm Ayman Salah. Good night.